what they will do is effectively hijack the weekend.
Yeah.
And that is designed to be something that hijacks the weekend in order, in part, to make a point about Palestine and Israel, but also very much almost as part of these sort of cultural values and culture war in the sort of oppressor colonial struggle against Israel, with all these very dubious sort of woke critical theory concepts around them.
Yes.
And actually, I just don't think I just don't think that's right for the next weekend.
What do you think about the idea of banning this march because of the offence that it would cause to many people and the potential for disorder or criminality, Chip?
Well, I'm against banning it at the moment. So I think you've got to separate things in time and space. So the first thing is that the 11th, when the march takes place, is Armistice Day. And that is centered around the 2-minute silence. The major events of the weekend are the National Service of Remembrance, which takes place on the 12th.
Yeah.
And that is when all the other services will be taking place around the country. So if you look at the timings and time and space of what happens on the 11th, Remembrance in terms of the national 2 minutes is over at 11 o'clock. The march isn't going to happen until 1 o'clock. It's not going to interfere with the Festival of Remembrance at the Royal Albert Hall. So the events are limited to Saturday. They're not going on Sunday. So both geographically in time, it is not going to interfere with things. Now, I would change my view if there was significant chatter on encrypted cloud-based apps and social media and things like that.
Yes.
I would say that there was going to be a significant criminal element of a significant size, which would create massive criminal activity and lead to mass arrest. At the moment, I don't see that. So I think the march should still go on.
And you take that view, Chip, on the basis of the principle of free expression, free speech?
Yeah, I do really. And I think part of the problem, I think, is that, most remembrance events are either an individual or a collective thing within the group that you had or were sort of served with. It's really been politicized very significantly over the last week. And that's also been dangerous because that leads to reciprocal radicalization. And you can see that in the sort of chat rooms about the sort of right wing as well as the left thing. And of course, the counter-extremist strategy of October 15 wasn't just about Islamists, it was also about right-wing extremists and violent and non-violent extremism. Very difficult to define those things, of course. It's easy to define arresting someone for an offence. There is no crime in law of being a terrorist, as there is no crime in law of being an extremist.
Okay, Bob Seely then. So that's Chip's view, Bob. Let's stand by the principle of free speech and freedom of expression and let the marches go ahead, provided there's no good reason, strong reason to suspect there'll be criminal behaviour.
I buy that up to an extent. By the way, I do take issue with what Stig said about following the evidence and not jailing people and being soft on crime. I'm not sure. I think he made a particularly accurate case there, but let's just park that. To the point in question, when it comes to what the generals are saying, General Chip is saying, I think. Sorry, I meant Stig earlier, not General Chip. I do apologise.
Yeah.
What Chip is saying now, I respect it, and this is a nuanced case. But my problem with it is based on likelihoods, that some people are going to go there to protest. But a lot of people are going to go there or to turn up to pro-Palestinian demonstrations because they're going to be the same hard left rent mob with a reputation for violent disorder. They'll try to trash something or they'll try to attack something. And either way, what they will do is effectively hijack the weekend.
Yeah.
And that is designed to be something that hijacks the weekend in order, in part, to make a point about Palestine and Israel, but also very much almost as part of these sort of cultural values and culture war in the sort of oppressor colonial struggle against Israel, with all these very dubious sort of woke critical theory concepts around them.
Yes.
And actually, I just don't think I just don't think that's right for the next weekend. So I just every time that we think let these protests go ahead, they always seem to descend into violence. They always seem to descend into criminal damage.
Yeah.
And then we are naively surprised at the end of it.
So, Bob, is that not an argument for the police to deal robustly with crime when it happens, rather than to believe that it might happen and then act preemptively? If you're accusing extremists in a protest of wanting to accuse our society of being authoritarian, the way to answer that is not to be authoritarian and to deal with crimes as and when they arise, Bob. That's the argument.
Okay, John, that's a really good point, and I think my answer again to that is that our experience is that we tend to be trusting and a little bit naive in this country, and that every time we say, well, let's give people the right to protest, let's give people the right to march, we are so often surprised when there's criminal damage on quite a large scale, or there's violence, or there's disorder, or there is just going to be anti-Semitic slogans shouted out. There are going to be sort of open support for Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. And I hope people don't doubt that after the slaughter of 1,400 Jewish people, and indeed some Arab Bedouin as well, just a couple of weekends ago. So you're right, one can say we'll arrest people on the day, but I also think there's an argument of saying, actually, we've seen this before, and, no, thank you. You can protest at 51 other weekends of the year, but on this weekend, you're not going to. We're not going to take the chance, because based on what we've seen of previous hard left organizations and hard left demos, we know what happens. And not everyone will be there from the hard left, in the same way that the poll tax riots and all the other riots since, there's always a hardcore protesters. But you sort of know that a lot of them are going to turn up.
Okay, what do you say to that, Chip? It's not just about law enforcement, it's about respect for the sacrifice made by men and women in uniform for our country.
Well, it's separated in time and space. I think the thing I'd always say about these things is there's a classic line by the independent advisor on terrorism about the world depicted in the film Minority Report is strangely illusory. That is, that you can decapitate people prior to something happening and think the problem's going to go away, and it's not. I think it is this scale thing for me. So, for example, last weekend, the figures that I've seen, there were 19 people arrested over the weekend. Now, those are amplified, of course, because of what you see on social media, and that is the problem. And that brings out the worst on both the left and the right, where the intelligence and security report, for example, of July 22, goes into three areas. The first one is cultural nationalism, and that is what we're seeing to some degree here, the belief that Western culture is under threat from mass migration and the lack of integration is often anti-Islam. We're seeing some of that here as well. So I think we have to be really careful. And at the moment, based on the evidence, I would say that it should still go ahead. But as I said, if there was enough evidence of encryption and chatter, then I would say you need to either have restrictions under the Public Order Act 1986 or to prohibit it.
But Chip, I mean, you make a very valid point. I'm respectful of it. But if you've got all these sort of potential, you're going to have a potential sort of hard right backlash. What areas is it going through? Is it going to go through Jewish areas and make people feel incredibly unsafe? Is it going to go through Muslim areas and be used to incite people and radicalize them? Again, I just think the best thing to do, if the organizers could maybe have a little bit of a think and realize that this is the one weekend where, why don't you just let the nation, our nation, not somebody else's nation, but our nation, remember its war dead. And if you want to protest, you can do so at every other weekend. I just think, apart from anything else, I think it's counteroffensive, it's counterproductive and actually offensive that people are deliberately trying to hijack that weekend. Now, that's not a reason for stopping it. But I just think a little bit of thought on behalf of the organisers that maybe if we want to be respectful of Britain's the war dead from 2 world wars and the wars in between, that actually this is not the right time to do it. Okay. And if you are going to have a hard left mob along or a hard right backlash, those are additional reasons for the police saying, actually, let's think ahead and work out what generally happens in these situations, rather than being seen to be caught napping and then, having to be cleaning up memorials for weeks on end afterwards.